Hey everybody, welcome to Real Talk. Last week, we had episode 1 of a new series that we started called What's the Big Deal About Jesus? Here at Stonebrooke, we talk about Jesus all the time. So why do we do that? What's the big deal about this person who lived 2,000 years ago? What in the world does he have to do with my life? Why do I care? This person lived and died and supposedly rose again. How does that affect my everyday life? What's the big deal? So we said some things there. It'd be good for you to listen to that episode. But what we're doing today is we're moving forward a little bit, and we're going to talk about what's the big deal about Jesus' miracles. Now, one thing we love to do is make this a conversation, not just a one-way communication. We want to hear your questions. What's the one thing that if you could ask about what we're talking about today, or we talked about in the last episode, what's that one thing that you would like to know about? And we'd love to hear that. You can text your messages anytime to 415-SB-ROCKS. It's 415-727-6257. That's an anonymous line. You can ask anything that you want, and we would love to answer that on some upcoming episodes. Now, what we're talking about today, like we said, is what's the big deal about Jesus, but what's the big deal about his miracles? One of the distinguishing characteristics of the life of Jesus, according to the records that we have, books of the New Testament called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, document the life of Jesus. It's like a documentary. There wasn't a film crew following him around, but there were all these people that were following him around, taking notes, and a few years later, they sat down and recalled the memories of Jesus and what he did, what he said, and they wrote those down for us to enjoy, but also to learn from here thousands of years later. But when people talk about Jesus' miracles, some people doubt whether they actually happened, and that's certainly a conversation we can have. But today we want to know, what's the big deal about them? What did they accomplish? Well, the big deal to us for this conversation is Jesus healed and performed miracles because they revealed who God is and what God is like. Some people say that, well, he performed miracles to show he was the Son of God. Maybe, but that's really not the case. Many times throughout these stories of Jesus, the phrase moved with compassion comes up. The thing is, Jesus wasn't trying to prove anything except what God was like. And time again, the reason Jesus healed someone, and we'll talk about there's a difference between a miracle and actual healing, but when he healed someone, it was because he loved them. He wanted their life to be better. He wasn't trying to get people to worship him. He wasn't going around saying, look how great I am. He simply loved people. He hated that his creation wasn't accomplishing what he'd started out for it to be. And so he wanted to restore that creation to what he desired originally, which was everything being very good, for there to be peace in our relationships, but also when there's sickness, where there's suffering, he wanted to alleviate that. But we're going to look at a few of the miracles that his best friend John wrote about. And John uses this word right here, signs, that some of the miracles that Jesus did were for signs. Now, what is a sign? A sign is giving you some sort of information about something you didn't know. Bridge out ahead is a sign. 70-mile-an-hour speed limit is a sign. Long-haired, freaky people need not apply is a sign. If you're under 40, ask your parents. But a sign is something you can read that tells you something you need to understand. So when Jesus performed these miracles, we say all the time that everything that Jesus said, everything that Jesus did was revealing who God is and what God is like. These miracles are showing us something about God. There's something we can read between the lines. There's something that he's trying to say beyond the actual healing or miracle that was accomplished. Now let's start with the very first one, that Jesus ever did. I don't think we'll get to all these, but we'll do the best we can. There's a story where he was at a place called Cana. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Let's go over here and look at it. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. To the Jewish people, a wedding was like a week-long, big, blowout shindig. I don't know what shindig, where that ever came from, but let's move on. The wine supply ran out. This is a big, big deal in first century Palestine. They ran out during the festivals. So Jesus' mother, this is really interesting, told him, they have no wine. This is really a cool interaction between Jesus and his mom, because Jesus' mom knew some things about him that other people didn't know. Jesus hadn't actually made his big splash on society. He was sort of flying under the radar. He had a few disciples that were following around, but he hadn't really gone public, if you will, with who he was. Jesus' mother is sort of trying to push him out into the public sphere and saying, hey, they have no wine. Jesus looks back and says, dear woman, that's not our problem. My time has not yet come. Everything that Jesus does reveals something to us about God. God is not pushy. People always say, well, if God would just show up in a big way and walk down the street, I would believe in him. That's not anything like his character. He's very humble, and he doesn't go where he's not wanted. Jesus is laying back as long as he possibly can. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you. Jesus is standing there with his mom. She looks over at the servants that are there, says, if he says to do something, you do it. It's actually good advice for us today. Whatever Jesus says, if we'll do that, good things will happen. So standing nearby, and this seems to us in the 21st century, like, why do we need to know this? But this is very, very important. This is the crux of everything that's happening here, sort of under the surface for this sign that Jesus is about to do. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars. Why do we care how many there were? Why do we care if they were stone? Why do we care if there are water jars? And what are water jars? To the first century Jewish people, especially those that practiced the Jewish religion, and especially the Pharisees, which were like the nemesis of Jesus, they were the ones that were the leaders of the current religion. Understand that one thing Jesus came to do was to shut down religion. Now, you may be watching this and saying, aren't you religious? Well, the definition that we use for religion is a man-made system of rituals and rules where we try to win God's favor, to win God's acceptance, to get God to like us and do good things for us by doing a certain set of these rituals or rules. But Jesus came to say that's not what God is like. Jesus came to turn the idea of how we interact with God on its head. But one thing that the religious people of the day did is any time they came into their home, they'd been out in the marketplace, they'd been to school, they'd been to work, they may have interacted with Gentiles, people who weren't Jewish, and they got Gentile cooties on them. So they had to, when they came home, they went through the ceremonial washing. Some people actually had what was called a mikvah, which was like a baptismal pool in their house. But at least they had these jars where they would dip their hands and ceremonially, like a surgeon scrubbing up before a surgery, they would wash off the filth of the world and anybody they had interacted with or anything they may have done that broke God's laws. This was a ritual when they came into the home. Jesus is about to do something, and he's looking around. Well, we need to fill up some water. How about we use these religious symbols to make some party fuel? He's going to change water, as you probably know the story, into wine, a symbol of celebration, a symbol that's happening at a wedding where 2 people are joining into a lifelong relationship, and he is going to make the party fuel by thumbing his nose in the first miracle that he performs at the religious establishment and basically performing a sacrilegious act in their sanctified holy vessels. They used it for ceremonial washing. That's what we said. Each could hold up to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. When the jars have been filled, dip some out, take it to the master of the ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. The master of ceremonies tasted the wine, tasted the water that had now become wine, and he just freaks out. And he calls the master of ceremony, he calls the host over and says, a host usually serves the best wine. He serves the best wine first, and then when everybody kind of gets drunk, they don't care anymore about the wine. So he brings out the worst, cheaper wine, save some money. But he said, you've kept the best until now. John is leveraging this miracle that Jesus performs to say the things that happened before Jesus came, they weren't the best, but now the best has come. Jesus is the best revelation of who God is. He's showing us what God is like. God isn't about cold rituals where you're trying to wash off the dirt of the world. Jesus is about intimate relationship where there's joy and when there's life and when there's celebration. And then it goes on and says, this miraculous sign, John said, at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus, and this is really important, this is what I'm saying is the big deal about his miracles. This is the first time Jesus revealed his glory. His miracles aren't just cool things that he does to show off. They're revealing something about God, something about God's glory. Now, what in the world does that mean? Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, years after Jesus died and rose from the dead, it says the Son, talking about Jesus, radiates God's own glory. In other words, when God shines, it looks like Jesus. Jesus is God shining and showing himself. And he expresses the very character of God. So that's what we say, these miracles, they're expressing something about God's nature and character. It's just not neat stories in the Bible. We can learn about God from looking at Jesus' miracles. Now, there's another miracle that Jesus performed, and John sort of keys off of various trips that Jesus made to Jerusalem around these Jewish festivals. Or in this case, in John chapter 5, he calls it a holy day. It says, afterwards, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. There were at least 3 times of the year that all males, 30 years old and over, had to return to Jerusalem, to the temple. They had to offer sacrifices and participate in many times a week-long festival. It's basically a big party. It's like a conference that they go to, celebrating different events that the Jewish people are remembering that have happened in their history. But inside the city, near the sheep gate, you know where the sheep gate is. This is deep revelation for you. Are you ready? This was the gate where the sheep came in. Huh? How about that? In Jerusalem, there was this place called the Pool of Bethesda. It's kind of cool to know what that name Bethesda means. It actually simply means the house of mercy. Jesus is about to reveal something about God, that he's merciful. No matter what a person's done, no matter where a person is, no matter the suffering or destruction that has happened in their life, Jesus will pursue you. He will find you. That sounds like I'm watching the movie Taken, and he will kill you. No, he won't kill you. He wants to heal you in every area of your life, restore us to what God originally intended for us. But there was this place called the Pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. Now, crowds of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, lay on these porches. It's sort of like, picture 5 covered sheds around a pool. Now, one of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. I don't know if you can imagine, but he had been paralyzed, unable to walk, for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him what seems like a really stupid question: would you like to get well? But it's actually something that, when we're interacting with God, it's a question that needs to be asked. What is it that you want? Here's God himself walking into a place where people are not experiencing the original intention of God's creation for them. They're sick. They're suffering. They are paralyzed. They are not experiencing God's best. But God himself walks in and simply says, hey, would you like that to change? The man has an interesting answer, and he says, I can't, sir, for I have nobody to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. There was a tradition that believed an angel, for some reason, came down and the water would get stirred up. And if you got in there first, that you would be healed. Whether or not that was actually the case is a subject of much discussion and debate. But this is what the man expected. If I could just get in that pool, I could be healed, but I can't get there because somebody else always gets there ahead of me. But Jesus told him, and we can say a lot of things about that, but let's look at the thing that Jesus says. Remember, John is emphasizing that these are signs that are teaching us something about God's nature. It's showing us something about the reason Jesus came to earth. He said, stand up, pick up your mat. He's laying on this little mat, and this is important, and walk. I want you to get up from there. Well, that's something I can't do. Take up your mat. Okay, I can't do that either. And I want you to go take a walk. And we're going to find out that there's a subtle thing that Jesus is doing here. Instantly, the man was healed. Wow. He rolled up his mat and began walking. But here's the kicker that John wants us to know. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath. Now, to us in the 21st century, that means almost nothing. The Sabbath day to the Jewish people was holy. It was something that their tradition said, you just don't do any work on the Sabbath. Now, the Pharisees, who were the most conservative of the Jewish leaders, they were afraid that, well, maybe we're doing too much work. Is it too much if I go to McDonald's? Is it too much if I mow my yard? What is work? Is it just something that I'm not making money? Is that all right? Or do I just need to sort of sit and be perfectly still? Well, they established traditions on top of what God had said. God wanted people to know, I don't want you just to work every day. I don't want you to work your animals into the ground. I don't want you to work your employees into the ground. I want you to take at least one day a week, just kick back, enjoy your family, and enjoy the creation that I've made, because life isn't just about accomplishing things. Life is about enjoying a relationship and a partnership with God and with each other. But the Jewish people took everything that God intended to be relational, especially the Pharisees and the religious leaders, and made it transactional. They made it to where this is just a law you keep. This is just a rule you do. If you do it, God will like you. If you don't, God won't like you. End of story. And Jesus is coming to change that. But it was the Sabbath day, and to the Pharisees, doing anything that looked like work. In fact, they made these traditions, like I started to say, that were on top of the laws, where you could only carry a certain amount of weight. You could only walk a certain distance. I believe it was less than a quarter of a mile. If you walked more than a quarter of a mile on the Sabbath day, you were breaking God's commandments, and God didn't like you anymore. You are a sinner. So he picks up his bed and walks. So the Jewish leaders objected. They saw him walking down the road with his mat. They said to the man who was cute, hey, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. Now, the Old Testament doesn't say that, but their traditions, their laws on top of the laws on top of the laws said that. But he replied, hey, the guy that healed me said to do this. What am I supposed to do? And they said, who said such a thing? Who told you to walk on the Sabbath day? They're not caring at all that a condition that he suffered with and not been able to live his life or experience his dreams for 38 years. Was it 38 or 28? I should read my Bible more. For a really long time, he wasn't able to experience what God wanted him to experience. They're totally ignoring that because he's not following the rule. This is something that in this sign, Jesus is digging at the religious leaders saying, are you listening to what you're saying? Are you seeing that you're totally ignoring the whole purpose of the interaction, the relationship between God and man, and you're just you've made it into something that is cold and heartless and dead? But the man didn't know. This is something else that Jesus reveals about God. For Jesus had disappeared in the crowd. When people say, if God just showed up and made a big scene, I would believe him. I always think of this story. Here's an opportunity for Jesus to go, look, I healed this guy. All the rest of you people, look, I healed this guy. But Jesus is very humble. He's not trying to push himself onto people who aren't ready for him and to people who don't want who he is. But so the Jewish leaders began harassing Jesus for breaking the Sabbath rules. I love his reply. But he replied, my Father is always working. God, according to the Old Testament and the creation story, God rested on the seventh day. But Jesus reveals something about God is he just did that as an example so you guys wouldn't work all the time. But God is always doing things, and so am I. Well, this really upset the Jewish leaders. In fact, they tried to kill him. This is the epitome of no good deed goes unpunished. Jesus heals this guy, and they want to kill him. For he not only broke the Sabbath, but he called himself equal with God. Now, I would like to skip down. We just have a few more minutes here, and I would like to look at one last example of Jesus' miracles. We might come back. In fact, I probably should do a whole series. Let's see here. Oh, here's where I want to go. A whole series on the subject of the miracles of Jesus. It's fascinating. So many things that he did reveal so many cool things about God. But real quickly, I want to say this. Miracles or healings aren't totally up to God. God always desires partnership, participation, cooperation from us. And this is another thing that Jesus reveals in one of the miracles. Jesus went with him. There was this man named Jairus that wanted him to go to his house, and all the people followed him, crowding around him. Jesus was like a rock star, walking down the road. Imagine hundreds, if not thousands of people pressing in on him. But there was a woman in the crowd that had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many physicians. She had gotten any better. She spent everything that she had, but she heard something about Jesus. And so she came up behind him through the crowd. Get this picture. Jesus is walking down the road, and this lady is behind him. And I know some people think Jesus knew everything, but we're going to see that there's some things he did not know. He didn't know she was there. He's not pursuing her. He's not initiating anything. He's walking to another guy's house to help him with the situation. But she came up behind him and touched him. Little quick, interesting side note. Why would she think, because she goes on to say, she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. What in the world? Why would she think such a thing? Well, there's a little known passage. It's in the book of Malachi, one of the last verses in the Old Testament that predicts a Messiah or a deliverer coming to Israel. And the scripture says that the Son of Righteousness, describing this future leader, will rise with healing in his wings, the Bible says. But in the original Hebrew, which this woman would have known, it said this new leader, this new deliverer that comes to town, will have healing in his outer garments. She's simply saying, I believe this is the one from God that is here to restore, in her case, she would think Israel, to right relationship with God. I bet he has healing in his robe. She comes up behind him and she touches him, and immediately the bleeding stops. She could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Notice what Jesus does. Jesus realizes at once that healing power had gone out from him. So he turned around and said, wait. Who touched me? Now I always stop and say, why did Jesus ask who touched me? The reason is, he didn't know. This is so fascinating to me that people think, well, I wish God would see me where I am. I wish he would do something for me. But the cool thing about this is this woman pursued him. She initiated this miraculous power coming into her body and changing her circumstances simply because she believed Jesus was a certain thing and she reached out to him. The disciple says, how can you wonder? All these people are touching you, but Jesus kept looking. And this woman, trembling, realized what had happened in her. She came down, came before Jesus and told him everything that she had done. And that Jesus makes this amazing statement, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." So our question, and this reveals another thing about Jesus, that he's ready. Whatever it is you're needing in your life, wherever you are, he's the answer. But he desires partnership with you. One thing that this miracle reveals is the power is available if we will decide to press through whatever the obstacles that we have to believing or to entering into a relationship with him, and join up with him. His power, his compassion, his mercy, his joy is there for all of us. What's the big deal? The question is Jesus still alive? I believe he is. Is Jesus still the same? And I absolutely believe he is. Our time is gone for this week. I know we had to go pretty quickly through that. There's so much more we can say, but I really appreciate you hanging out with us on this episode of Real Talk. Let your friends know about this podcast. Tell them to sign up. Tell them to check it out. We meet in person at Stonebrooke Center a couple times a month and talk about Jesus, but also we continue those conversations here online on this podcast with Real Talk. So thanks for hanging out, and we will see you again next time. If you have a question, don't forget to send those questions in, and we'll discuss them in a future episode. Have a great day, guys.